Singapore has lost 90% of its original forest cover, and there are more reports of animal encounters in our urban landscape. In this week's Spotlight, Tan Se-Hui finds out how humans can better coexist with wildlife in Singapore.
At the Wildlife Healthcare and Research Centre, senior vet Dr. Abraham MATHEW and his team are responsible for checkups on animals brought in by various wildlife rescue groups.
So when we take it out of the bag, initially it gets startled. So then, of course, it gets a bit defensive.
Here, he examines the animals before releasing them into the wild.
You can tell by the sheen of the scales. You can tell by the turgidity of his muscles. He's actually got very good muscle tone. So that's a good indication that the snake is actually in good health.
So for this python specifically, it's not hurt. So how long does it stay here before it gets released?
We keep them here for a maximum of 1 week. Some species cannot be held for a week. They need to be released immediately. So species like pangolins, colugos, the faster the better.
The team sees about 2,000 displaced animals a year, up by about 500 compared to 5 years ago.
Sometimes they fall out of a tree, sometimes road accidents throughout Singapore, because they don't know that they can't cross the road, right? So they try to cross it, and sometimes accidents happen.
Animal fatalities in the past year included a leopard cat and 3 sambar deer.
Sambar deer were affected by the current development going on at Mandai. So an area which they're known to feed on was removed. So then they're beginning to explore alternatives, and which are few and far between. So then once they wander onto a road, a small proportion of them actually get killed.
In the years to come, Mandai will be home to a new bird park and other wildlife-themed attractions, such as a rainforest park and eco-resort. To ensure wildlife safety during the construction period, Mandai Park Development has put in place connectivity measures, such as rope crossings and colugo poles.
As a wildlife organisation that reviews and treats wildlife around the island, the last thing we want is to add a number to it. In our plan, we're also adding 2 more rope bridges, including one across the water inlet, so as to enhance connectivity. One important point I think that really needs to be enhanced, and we are planning to do that, is really the driver's education.
Despite having lost 90% of original forest cover, Singapore is home to a large diversity of plants and animals. According to NParks, almost 400 species of birds, more than 2,000 species of native plants, and 250 species of hard coral live in our midst. But what happens when Singapore's development encroaches into their habitats? I want to find out how Singapore and its people can coexist with wildlife. In early 2018, researchers in Singapore discovered these ant species for the very first time ever. Other newly found or recorded species include the bent-toed gecko and swamp-dwelling skink. They're among the 480 species that were discovered over the last 6 years in urban Singapore. Some discoveries were made by Professor Peter Ng, director of the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum.
There's quite a lot of chat and discussions about the fact that we have 3 endemic crabs, freshwater crabs, which are found in Singapore. When we say endemic, means they're found in Singapore and nowhere else on the planet. When I found these back in the 80s, right, we only had, of course, the external features of the animal to look at. In the last 10 years, we have new tools like genetic tools, right? We have DNA profiling. It is genetically different. They are evolving.
He's confident that even though Singapore has lost a majority of its mangroves and more than half of its coral reefs, biodiversity can still thrive in our urban landscape.
You forget one thing about animals, they're resilient, they're tough. We have lost some, we have gained some, and the trick is how to take your urbanized habitats to places you destroyed and try to mitigate and bring them back. It is possible.
To cultivate a better living environment for these animals, National Parks Board has a species recovery program to help rare or threatened species survive in Singapore.
Okay, she's going into her nest soon.
Oh, that's a pollen.
She's looking for her home. Yeah. Oh, you just went in.
It went.
Yeah.
Bees are one of those targeted species. At Hort Park, an educational trail was launched in September last year. Bee hotels made of wooden blocks were installed to create nesting sites for solitary bee species.
One of the important things is to try and conserve the habitats where they are already found, so our nature reserves, our parks, our gardens, and to enhance the habitats appropriately. There's also a big component of stewardship, understanding biodiversity. A lot of it is education as well, to try and get people more excited about what our neighbors, basically, our animal neighbors that we live here with.
Oh, I should touch them. Will they sting me?
As one nature expert puts it, the future of Singapore's biodiversity lies in the hands of the younger generation. And as more young people become aware of the environment, there is hope for better coexistence between wildlife and mankind.